Hi, welcome to the Dieku podcast. I'm Gary Snow. Today I'm joined by Chris Gonnerman, the creator of Basic Fantasy, Iron Falcon, and one of the four founders of the OSR. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, Chris, I've been really anxious to get you on the show for a while. I'm a big fan of yours. I think between Iron Falcon, which I have here, and Basic Fantasy, also, which is some of the best value I think anybody in the OSR can get, and I think highly underrated. So I'll just start off the interview by saying I think you're doing incredible work, and I think you deserve a little bit more credit in the industry. But before we go down all those little rabbit holes of the creation of all these awesome products that you're making, tell us, how did you get started in role-playing games?
Oh, good Lord. An eon ago, when I had less gut and much more hair, I was in high school, and I saw an advertisement for Moldav's Basic D&D in a science fiction magazine, and I knew nothing about it. I lived in an area where there was not going to be a D&D player. It just wasn't going to happen unless I did it. And so I had no one to talk to, no one to ask about it, but the ad looked interesting. And my mom was always telling me she couldn't figure out what to give me for Christmas. So I told her, give me that. So I got the 1981, the hot pink box with the red book inside it for Christmas. Within 2 months, I think I had the expert box set in my hand as well. And that's where I started. I mean, that's how I got started. That was my last year and a half of high school. I started a game, put a group together out of a short handful of my friends. One of those friends was particularly good at bringing people in, and he collected several other people. And one of those people that he collected is still with me after all these years. I've lost players along the way. I've got players who are gone, who have died. I mourn them occasionally. I miss them at my table for sure. But that's where I got started. I mean, that's what it was going to. And in 2006, that was the impetus for the creation of Basic Fantasy. I had been running a second edition AD&D campaign. It had come to, I can't say it was exactly a natural conclusion, but it had come to a spectacular conclusion. I was pretty happy with how it had gone, but I was feeling the urge to play something older and more basic. I really wanted get back to that game that I'd played when I was in high school, the game I'd run. And I drug my books out and they were falling apart. And I looked, and at that time you could not buy a print anywhere. You couldn't buy PDFs legally anywhere. And that was about the time that Castles and Crusades was being brought out. And I have the original white box set of Castles and Crusades that they released early. In fact, I just rearranged my pile of stuff in the house and found it, so I know I've still got it. With the Zaki dice that you color in and everything, game science dice you color in and everything, and which I didn't do. They're still in the bag, but I've got that. And I thought, if they could get that close with the OGL, could I get closer? Could I achieve those mechanics? You can't copyright mechanics. You can copyright the artistic expression, but you can't copyright mechanics. But I wasn't looking so much at that. The question was, could I use the OGL to keep them off my back? Which is basically what it is. The OGL is not a license. I don't care what it says on the label. It's a peace treaty. It's a peace treaty. It says, you do what we wizards tell you can do, and we won't sue you. And we used it that way. And I brought Basic Fantasy out, and I was told by many, many people that I was going to be getting a cease and desist letter, that I was going to end up in court, that they were going to sue the living daylights out of me. And I told people, I said, if they send me even one notice, I'm going to pull it all down. It never happened. I was on Dragonsfoot then. That was before we had our own forum, and we were publishing stuff there, posting stuff there. And that was 2006. By 2007, we had a copy ready to print. That's it. That's the original first edition. That is the hardback that I got before anybody else got to see it. First edition release 62, I think. Yep, 62. That was the first one we put out in print. And that was in early 2007. I don't remember the exact date, but I could look it up if I cared. It was 2007 anyway. It was after Osric was published. So the question of which one is first comes up occasionally. I released my game for first. Osric wasn't in the marketplace or in the public eye at all when I first released Basic Fantasy. But Basic Fantasy wasn't ready to print until 2007, and Osric came out in print sometime in the fall of 2006, I think. So it depends on how you count first.
So going back to the Dragonsfoot Forum and like all the different circlings, and I know Osric had a group of people. Were you involved in that at all, or were they just doing their own thing?
No, Stuart Marshall and I and Matt Finch had all interacted on Dragonsfoot. I had worked on stuff that Stuart had written for Dragonsfoot. I think I'd worked on some of his stuff. I know that there's some stuff that he had published out there on Dragonsfoot before Osric came up as a project. Of course, Dragonsfoot was all based around fan materials. None of it could be published in print because none of it was strictly legal. It was all based on the fly under the radar model that everybody used before the OGL became an option. And I was with them. That's where I learned the arts of layout and editing and so forth to create the materials I do now. I learned the basics of that while working with them. I did the layout on like half of the first 15 or so, 20 or so of the Footprints e-zines, bunch of their modules, because I knew how to do the layout. I figured it out the hard way. I did really badly to start with, but I got onto it eventually. But that's where I learned those things from, and that's where I started building my community before I branched out on my own forum. So,
and the name Basic Fantasy, like, did you like wrestle with that, like what you would name it, or did it just kind of come naturally?
Everything I've done that way has been a wrestling match. The name is no exception. I had a lot of people tell me it's too generic. Maybe it's what appealed to me when I finally came up with a name. The much of the stuff that we in the project consider traditional is just stuff I pulled out of thin air at the time. But yeah, I thought about options. I thought about doing something fancy, something with an and sign in the middle of it. I'm glad I decided not to do that. I'm glad I didn't do that with either of my game, because there's too dang many of them things out there with and signs in them.
Yeah.
Not that I mind for them, but I didn't want to be on the same track as everybody else. So Basic Fantasy tells the whole story in its name. It tells you what you're getting. Exactly what it says on the tin.
And for the layperson that isn't familiar with it, can you just tell us how you did some alterations and differentiations for how you played it?
Okay. I've had this pointed at me multiple times. The number of people that think that it's a warmed over 3.5e. The only thing I took out of 3.5e was the ascending AC, and I would have done that in 1981 if I'd thought of it, because I suck at two things: looking things up on tables and subtracting in my head. So I can't do Thackle because I got to subtract in my head, and I'm too slow at it. It's not that I can't do it. I'm not a complete idiot. I'm just slow. And I'm slow finding things on tables, slow doing lookups. Stuart Marshall once said, "I thought you were smarter than that." I razz him for that every now and then because he did it, but he's got a point. I'm just slow at it. Ascending AC involves relatively little subtraction, mostly addition, so I can do that fairly quickly in my head. I would have done that years ago if I'd thought of it, but I didn't. They thought of it, and I thought it was a good idea, so I took that. That's it. And that is really, you mentioned Iron Falcon. That is really a sticking point for a lot of people when I run Iron Falcon games in public, like at conventions. Way too many modern players just cannot wrap their minds around ascending AC. It's easier by far to just have an ascending AC system than it is to try to, and I think that's helped the game's growth.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that
anyway.
Most people believe that to be true, that ascending is just like simpler. And as you said, I almost can't believe nobody thought of it earlier. It just
if I had, I would have used it. And on a related note, because I've listened to several different podcasts lately, including a couple of actual plays and some commentators who've talked about THACO, THACO, like it was with us from the beginning, and that is not true. in 1981, Christmas, 1982, when I got my expert set, if there was stuff in print that had THACO in it, I didn't have any of it. I had the modules that came with those box sets. I had the box sets themselves. The math for THACO wasn't in there. I remember a later basic module that had it and had to have an explanation of how you did it because it wasn't in the rule books. We did not do that math to start with. We used those doggone tables. We looked up the numbers on the tables like God or Gary intended. Gary would have never done it because AD&D has the repeating 20s rule, and you can't do THACO with the repeating 20s rule. So you can't, he just wouldn't have done that. It just wasn't what he wanted. I don't have an attachment to that rule. I think it's kind of silly, honestly. A lot of the stuff that Gary did in the fine detail areas, it was too complicated for me. It's too much complexity for no good reason. But yeah, no, THACO just really wasn't with us from the beginning. And I find it so fascinating that so many people who may have lived through the later parts of that era think it was there from 74, 75, and it wasn't. It was sometime in the early 80s that it started popping up.
If we could take it maybe a step back and go back to like
Sure.
one of the things that I think is amazing and that you've cultivated so well is that community around basic fantasy. And so when you first proposed it and people rallied behind it and thought it was a good idea, can you just talk about those like early days of, did you ever think the community would grow as big as it has? And I guess going back to also your playing with friends over the years, the importance of community to role playing.
Oh, it's critical. I never at that time would have imagined it would be as big as it is, but I always expected to have a core of people with me working on this game, creating it, and not always the same group. When Basic Fantasy came out, there was nothing else. Osric wasn't out yet. Labyrinth Lord was a year off. Swords and Wizardry was probably a year off. I don't remember exactly when they came out. When Basic Fantasy came out, it was the only game like it. And it really still is the only game like it, as far as I know. I haven't encountered anybody else who's got a truly community-driven game. Everybody else's games are, however much they may accept assistance from the community, they don't turn to their community first. They set out to create something first, and they take stuff that's offered by the community sometimes, and sometimes they don't. Some of them are way more insular and more company-oriented and more business-oriented than I ever would agree to be. But I always expected the community, and it's because of that time at Dragonsfoot. I had been part of a community that created things, and it was wonderful. It was amazing. But we weren't making rules. We were making basically adventures. Dragonsfoot published a number of pretty good adventures, most of them for first edition AD&D, and I haven't run very many of them because I really haven't gone back to first edition AD&D. And the low level stuff works in Basic Fantasy, but the higher up you go, the more work you have to do to adapt it. So it's not been something I really wanted to go back to, although there's a couple of basic D&D adventures I did take and use. Using them in Basic Fantasy is really easy. So but I learned about community from there. I learned about how great it is to have people helping you. And I had a lot of response early on. There's a whole section of this book that I just showed off about oil and holy water that was written by one guy who hasn't been with the project in 17 years, probably, because he moved on to something else when something else that fit his interests more became available. But that's fine. He contributed. His name is in the book. His work is in the book. I appreciated his contribution. I haven't heard anything out of Nick Bogan in over a decade. He did the Strongholds and a few other things. But then there are people that have stayed with me. R. Kevin Smoot, James Lemon. Smoot was one of my early supporters. James Lemon is my right hand when it comes to creating stuff. He is senior editor and kind of project manager. Whips me when I forget what I'm doing. I've got other editors. Al Vetter comes to mind. He is a fantastic editor. He's been doing a lot of editing lately. But They don't all stay with you, and you just have to deal with that. It is a community situation. The important thing is to make sure that they feel welcome when they come back. I've had a few people come back lately, rejoin the project who've been away for a while, and that's great. They did other things that were fun for them, and now they're doing this again. I have artists that come and go and come and go and come and go because that's how artists are. And when they're here and they're making stuff, we're using it. And when they go off, they do whatever they want to do. I don't have any hold over them, but they know they're always welcome. They know I'm always happy to see them back in the area.
And
that's
and
how it works.
And how did it play out as far as like the pricing structure? Because like, I mean, I look at that and it's like a passion project. You are not making a ton of money on these products. And
it was never meant to be a commercial operation. It was never meant to be commercial at all. That book I keep waving around was sold at cost. What the minimum price Lulu would let me sell it for. And for the first and second editions, that was pretty much the rule. I don't remember exactly when this changed. Well, I know why it changed. It changed because of Amazon. Several years into the project, I was contacted on several occasions and asked the question. But I had a guy contact me and he said that Lulu shipping in Europe was very expensive. And had I considered Amazon? I had considered Amazon. Amazon through Lulu, but they added costs and made things complicated. And I mean, it really just wasn't going to be worth it for a lot of people to pay the premium to get them through Amazon. And it was going to raise the cost of the book off Amazon because that changed the category in Lulu's system. I don't really remember the details. It's all pretty fuzzy. It's been more than a decade ago, decade and a half probably. But anyway, this guy asked about it. And he said, "What about CreateSpace?" I said, "What?" He said, "CreateSpace." And I looked. CreateSpace was a partner with Amazon who did print books. They did paperbacks. That's it. But they did print books that could be sold through Amazon, and there was no extra complication involved in it. So we got involved with them. Well, Amazon's pricing system doesn't make sense. I know there must be some rule behind it, but I can't figure it out. It's virtually impossible to make nothing in all markets. And about the same time, had begun to have some expenses. Finally, the project's base storage became enough that I couldn't really host it with my business website anymore the way I had been. I needed it. It needed its own space and so forth. And so I asked my community, I said, "Would you mind if I added a small profit margin to the books?" And the community members were largely positive. Nobody said anything negative. I say largely positive. Nobody said anything about me not doing it. If I made a substantial profit, I'd have to figure out how to pay all those contributors. And I can't do that. So I set out to make a very small profit. And that's it. I basically just set the profit margin in cents. Now you can get, I'm not going to wave it again, the commemorative version of the first edition it makes me about $5 when you buy a copy. When a collector contacted me and asked me if he could get the first edition for his collection, and I said it's not available for sale anymore, and he wanted to know if I could put it back on sale, I had to do work for that. I had to do a fairly good amount of work digging stuff up and reorganizing. And unlike the rest of the project, it wasn't done for the good of all. It was done for one guy that wanted to buy a copy. So I put a profit margin on it. I'm getting paid for that work I did. I don't sell very many of those. First edition copies don't sell very much. They're not supposed to. They're there for collectors. But most of the books have under 20 cents on them. Some books are as low as like 10 cents a book. The object was not to make money, and I didn't until last year. I would go through the year. I used the money I made to buy books to give away at conventions. I never advertised that I did that, but I always did it. If I went to a convention, I'd have a box of books and I would hand them out. Everybody at the table, plus anybody who seemed adequately interested, who walked up and watched and seemed adequately interested, I would just hand them one. People are always bumfuddled when you do that. Of course, they're thinking the books cost 30, 40, 50, 60 bucks, and they don't. But I would do that. And anyway, that was just the deal. Is I needed to pay for those costs, and I would fill up that promotional fund, and then I'd buy books, and it would be empty. Fill up the promotional fund, buy books, it'd be empty. So it wasn't a money-making venture until the OGL debacle. And now I'm working on spending down the promotional money for promotional purposes to try to actually grow things a little bit. I mean, the object isn't to make a business out of it, obviously. Like I said, it's still not.
But before we get into the OGL and all the changes that kind of came from that, I'm holding a 3rd edition book here, and I'm looking at it, and let's see, there's like 170-ish pages, thereabouts. And like you said, you hand somebody this book, and do they almost think, well, it's too good to be true? Like, what's the catch? Like, that's when I first discovered that. I'm like going like, why is it like essentially free? I mean, you've done a great service to the community.
The PDFs are free. The ODTs are free. The art is licensed in such a way that people can't use it without getting permission either from me or from the original artists. The art is all licensed to me. It does not fall underneath the license of the book, except for things like maps and floor plans and so forth, which have to be under the same license as the text to be useful. But yeah, people look at it and they go, how do you do this for free? I've had a lot of people that have told me I should be charging for it, but if I charged more than I do, I'd have to figure out how to pay everybody. Everybody who contributed would deserve some share of it. And there's just no way to do it. Some of those people are completely out of reach. We found this out when we set out to relicense for the 4th edition. There are some of these people that are impossible to reach. Some of them might be dead. A couple of them definitely are. Many of them are just impossible to connect with. The fact that we kept a history of what we did, although it's not suitable for public consumption. I mean, it doesn't make sense to you unless you understand how it works. But I can dig through it and figure out what somebody contributed in general, and then I can decide if I need to just excise their work because I can't relicense it. But no, I'd have to pay them, and I can't. I just can't do that. It can't be made to work. Some of these people don't live in countries I can send money to. We've got art contributors from Italy, Spain, Australia, trying to think, Sweden. Thomas Arfert's from Sweden. His stuff is fantastic. He did the owl bear and several other things. I got artists all over the place. I've got contributors, text contributors. I don't even know where they all come from. We had a real regular contributor in Ukraine for a while, and I hope he's okay, because who knows? But you're just everywhere. So I mean, there's just no way I could do that. I've got contributors in Argentina that I'm pretty sure I'd have difficulty paying. Yeah. So we just did it this way as a community project. Now, Iron Falcon's not that way. Iron Falcon is a for-profit project. I still don't make much on it, though.
So before we talk about OGL Iron Falcon, I just want to like finish off talking about basic fantasy. Is like, so the community, it's got, you know, the field guide, it's got adventure anthologies, like it's a quite comprehensive system. And I have to ask a couple things on that. Is that how much more do you see coming out of the community? And then secondly, as you go forward, how come do you think people have stuck with basic fantasy over? I mean, now there's like, you know, like you mentioned a bunch of the other retro clones, and then some of the ones like OSC that are coming or have come over the years. How come this community has kind of stuck with it, and they've had like 3rd edition, 3.5, 4,
because
5?
We have a community. The community is always here. There's always somebody here. We're always welcoming people. We don't gatekeep anybody except jerks. We throw them out. But pretty much otherwise, people that are interested, who want to contribute, we have a place for them. We have you know, stuff for them to do, things for them to play. You know, it's that's what it's about. It's about getting people involved. So many, well, basically, as far as I know, all the other OSR games are to some extent or another a commercial operation. To some extent or another, they all have commercial aspirations, some more than others. But yeah, they're all pretty much that way. They all look at it as a business. And even if they accept contributions from a community, or they have a community that they have, the community is second class. and I don't mean to pick on anybody, but that's just how it works. The stuff produced by the company or the author or the whatever is the first class stuff, and then there's the stuff produced by the community, some of which may get raised up to first class, but most of it stays in this kind of a second class category. And most of them don't really have a community like that at all, where they welcome contributions, where they welcome people to actually create materials and so forth. We do. We're happy to have contributors. We're happy to have people jump in and do things and be part of it. That's part of it. The other part of it is we have legs. Basic Fantasy's been on the market as a buyable book since 2007. There has not been a time you couldn't buy a copy of it somewhere. There's not been a time since 2006 you couldn't download a free PDF or free ODT. There's not been a time you couldn't get everything that we have for free in digital format. We haven't come and gone. We haven't declined and recovered. I know there are some OSR projects that have effectively evaporated. Some of them are down to skeleton crews or whatever. Some of the older ones. I don't know a great deal of detail about this. This is more along the lines of stuff I've heard than stuff I actually have witnessed, because I don't have time to mess with other games. I had to apologize to David. I'm gonna butcher his name. David Ledage, I think, is his name. The guy responsible for the Arcanum game. I have fond memories of running that in college, and I have the 30th anniversary on my shelf. He wanted to know what I thought of the 30th anniversary, and I had to admit to him I haven't had time to read it.
There's so many games now.
Since I got it like a year, 2 years ago, I forget even how long ago I got it. I have not really had time to sit down and look at it because I've got so much other stuff going on.
And this is just like a hobby for you, or a passion, I should call it. That you have a day job, and like this is not paying bills, like you said, like very minimal costs or very minimal profit are happening.
It really, I mean, last year was an exception. I looked at sales figures today, and this year is going to be like maybe a hair better than 2022 was. But with everything being more expensive, I really don't think it's going to make my hosting fees are going up on me. So, I mean, I don't know that it's going to be much better. Last year was an exception, and I'm going to have, I've got promotional money for a little while to do some things that I really would like to do. I'm hoping I can get to some conventions this year. If y'all watching this have a convention that I could reasonably get to within the continental US this year, and you'd like to have me show up and run some games, contact me. Okay. I'm not hard to find.
And I will have all the links in the video description. So reach out to Chris if you have a
I'm absolutely interested in it.
And you're in the Midwest, correct?
I am. Middle of god awful nowhere.
And how do you think that kind of feeds into the tradition of Midwest and role-playing games? It kind of feels like they go hand in hand.
No, we're just as capitalist as anybody. And I run a business. I am not anti-capitalism, for anybody who just thinks I just said something ornery. But one of the things I've noticed is that, I mean, I've got a day job and I need to make money at it, and I run my business in a way to make a living. When it comes to the game, every time I've seen somebody take their hobby, whatever their hobby is, and turn it into their business, they start to measure everything in dollars. They start to measure everything they create, everything that they do, every task they undertake in terms of dollars. And they will omit tasks that don't have a significant dollar advantage to them. I'm running this as a community project. We create things sometimes that have, objectively, if I sold them for a profit, they wouldn't make anything. There's no way they would. And I spend time on them, sometimes more time than I ever should. I've spent a lot more time on some of these adventures, writing, rewriting, editing, and so forth. That's why we're constantly in revision. Even for things that are in print, there's always the possibility of new revisions. This does drive some people batty, but it's how it works. I refuse, even though I did make money at this last year. I couldn't live on it. I'd be pretty skinny if I tried, like dead. But I mean, even with that, I'm not measuring this in dollars. This is not a dollar thing. I don't care if any of these books make money or not. I don't care, as long as it doesn't cost me as long as I can feed enough money back into it to keep the hosting going and to pay for the relatively minor expenses I have otherwise. The hosting is most of it anymore. We have a lot of stuff out there. Backing up the forum is a big job.
And then,
but that's it, you know.
And then this last year in January, obviously everybody's well aware of the OGL fiasco. As it's become known as.
I really feel like the word debacle.
Debacle, you like that better?
We don't get to use that word. Debacle is a perfect word for the purpose. I mean, there's no place else in all my history of speaking English that debacle has worked better. They absolutely screwed that up. They absolutely did that. I mean, that was terrible and hilarious in a sense, looking at it from a distance.
But the community jumped into action, and you chose the route of putting the basic fantasy into Creative Commons. And maybe just walk us through that decision of like when you saw what was happening with the OGL, and I don't know when you decided the Creative Commons versus their output of Creative Commons and that kind of thing. So maybe walk us through the steps and decision making to that.
When I may say some things here that may make some people a little cross with me, and I'm going to apologize in advance if to these people.
They can send the hate to me.
Yeah. Decision-making process for me was different than it was for most of those others, because most of the others do look at it as a business. They look at it from the perspective of a business. I mean, you look at the sales, as I understand it, and this is anecdotal, but as I understand it, Paizo and Troll Lords both sold something like 6 months worth of inventory in like a month or 2 months. One of the two, I believe, sold out of their inventory restock from after Christmas. Way faster than they expected to. Now, because we're print on demand, we can't run out, which is wonderful. But it was crazy. It was insane. But we didn't look at it from the perspective of a business. We never did. I chafed at the restrictions of the OGL. The OGL made some things difficult. I couldn't hardly even say D&D because of the way the OGL license read that I had to follow from my rule book. And so choosing Creative Commons was easy for me. I was already familiar with Creative Commons. I'm an open source developer in the software world. Creative Commons doesn't apply there, but I understand open licenses because I've spent time researching them. I've always chosen the most open license I can come up with. And this was no exception. The decision to go with Creative Commons was easy. Attribution share alike. Anybody who uses our rules has to share their digital copy under the same license, and they have to share and they have to give full attribution to whoever the author or authors happen to be. Which, in some cases, like for the core rules, technically I'm the only rights holder. It's the only one of the books we have where all the contributors have agreed to transfer their copyrights to me. They have to agree to that in order to contribute. Everything else, though, it's often several people in a row, or it'll be copyright something, Chris Gonnerman, James Lemon, and contributors. And then everybody in the contributors list is included. They're all part of the copyright. They're just down there in a separate section, but they're all in the copyright. Lost track of the question here.
Well, just so walking through the steps of like when
so that was the decision. The decision for licensing was to have the most open license we could, to have a license that would not constrain me ever again in the future in any way I didn't want to be constrained, and that would only constrain other people in ways to insist that they have to be good community members. They have to at least minimally comply with what our community is about. Attribution share alike. And so that was the decision. It was easy. The hard part for me was deciding if I thought I could do it, if I thought that it would be legal. And I did consult lawyers, but I don't have what you'd call a solid opinion. I have more like along the lines of informal or off the record opinions, but I was told that it would probably be acceptable the way I described doing it. I went forward with it. And I must not have done too bad. They haven't sent me any nasty grams yet. I suspect, though, that it might be bad for Wizards to go after anybody who did something like this at this point, simply because the PR damn near killed them, and in the D&D market anyway. It really hurt their sales. It really hurt their company reputation. They had a huge amount of backlash, and everybody else went someplace else also. Everybody else turned a different way. I don't know the details, but I know that all the major vendors did. And the part that probably some of them irritated me. Many of them tried to recreate the OGL in their own image. I really felt like that was a mistake. The whole point of the OGL was it was a peace treaty with Wizards, the people that actually owned the IP that in theory we were all using at the time. Somebody else creating something that looked like the OGL, I didn't really see as moving forward. It looked to me like they were trying to tread water and stay in the same place. And that's not what I wanted. If I was going to have to change the license, if I was going to have to go through that pain and suffering, I wanted something better when I got done. So that's how I ended up choosing it.
Yeah, and I kind of agree with you as far as like I think the orc license, and there's so many licenses being kind of floated around, and
I
it
don't
just
want,
all
I don't
felt.
want to call, I don't want to call a name out, but I
Yeah.
do feel like that's what they're doing. They're trying to recreate the OGL, but none of them have the mass of Wizards, the sheer size of them to need that kind of structure. And I wanted the fiction of the fictional concept of product identity gone.
And
It's gone.
I really appreciate, Chris, when I look at, we'll talk about all the things you've done even beyond this, but I really appreciate the fact that you certainly seem to march to the beat of your own drum. Like you go, I just want to do this and I'm going to do this, and you figure out a way to do it. And it's nice now that the OGL is out of the picture, and you're really, truly just like going, this is what I want to do now.
Unfortunately, we have books that are under the OGL that probably will never be able to be extracted. There is a Herculean effort being done right now to rewrite what we can't relicense from the field guides and build a new omnibus version that's probably going to be the size of 3.5 field guides when they get done with it. The guy doing the work on that, Bago, Matt Sluice, I probably butchered his name. Bago, I understand. That's his forum handle. He's been doing the organization on that, and he's doing a stellar job. But it's getting big. We're going to have more monsters than anybody ever wanted when we get done with that. But many of our books we're just not going to be able to extract them. We can't contact enough licensees to get permission. So many of them may stay OGL as long as the OGL remains available. But since they didn't actually cancel it, I'm not too worried about them, but we're not putting effort into them either.
I think the cows are out the gate, and I think it's almost a free for all now. But with that said, recently there was a game that came out. What was it? Demons. I don't even want to draw attention to it, but
oh no, go ahead. Here it is. I have
Demons and Dragons.
Demons and Dragons. I have a copy of this. I'll get this lined up with my camera. Copy of the book. I had to have a copy. I had to have a copy. It is 100% our book, except for the art. They understood the assignment to the point that they removed all the art because they didn't have license for it. What they didn't understand was that they couldn't take my name off of it, and they took my name off of it. That was the violation.
And so to catch people up, Demons and Dragons was put on Amazon and other sales site. Basically, they just took your written content, copied and pasted it into a new layout with different art, and then started to sell it.
The layout is the same. The fonts are the same. That is still our Soutane fonts that we use. They broke the flow in a couple of places when they worked on it and didn't fix it. So there's places that doesn't flow as nice as ours. The art is random and lacks character. And they've recycled certain pictures multiple times. There are several different monsters that have the same picture, for example. The earth elemental and the stone golem and several creatures made of rocks or dirt all have the same figure, for example. That didn't concern me so much. It was the taking my name off of it and effectively not just my name, but several people, it was just a weird situation. It was a very, very weird situation.
And then the sales price too was like it was like the sales price was like almost like 3 times what you would charge on top of that.
This book I have here cost me $20. Our paperback 4th edition is $8.35. The 3rd edition was $5 for most of its period of publication through Amazon. Amazon tweaked the price on that one in a way that I still don't understand, because it should have been more like $6, but it always ran for $5 for a long time. Then we brought the 4th edition out; it became $8.35. It's a bigger book, and they changed their pricing scheme again. but 835 versus 1995 for this, and there was another place that was like 2390 something. But I went ahead and got it. That's some of my promotional money right there. I had to have a copy of it. I had to have something to show for that whole experience. It was actually one thing that was interesting about it. I'd never seen what the matte covers looked like, because I always used a gloss cover because that was traditional, and this was done with a matte cover. I kind of like it. It doesn't take fingerprints as bad, but I don't know. I just like my gloss covers.
So then you learned about this. How did you first learn about it, and then what was your initial reaction?
I was told in several different places by different people at the same time. I got messages through Facebook Messenger from some people that I know on Facebook. I got a message on my forum. I think I may have gotten the message on the forum before the Facebook Messenger messages, but I noticed the Facebook messages first or something. And at first I was like, "You're kidding!" And then I looked at it and saw what they'd done, and I was outraged. I was pretty mad about it, and I kind of made a bit of a stink, and I had a bunch of people helping me make a stink. The Discord, we have a Discord. I don't spend a lot of time on the Discord, but if I go over there and make a rally and cry, then people turn out. And yeah, we pretty quickly got through to them. It was difficult to find a way to connect with the other author. I did. We had an interesting chat that I made a copy of, and I'm glad I did, because they owned the venue and they tore it down when they were done with it. And if I hadn't made a copy, I would not have a copy of what I said or what they said or anything. They didn't understand how how the license worked. They didn't read the OGL or understand how it functioned. And they couldn't have followed the rules because they didn't understand them. And I don't hold any malice towards this person. I don't really want to discuss what little I do know about them at this point. It's an ugly scene, and it's in the past. But I have a physical artifact to prove that I was there. So
anyway. For those watching at home, don't do that.
Yeah, we're not going after them anymore. I don't know if you can find the author of the book anymore, but if you do, it's not worth it. There's no longer any need to go after them. The fight's long since over. But yeah, it was weird. It was a weird situation.
Well, you handled it professionally. I know you put out a couple YouTube videos. I also have links to those in the description, and I thought you were nice and calmer than I would have been if that had happened to me. So it was well done on your part to kind of just move on and resolve it. Now, if we can just kind of shift to Iron Falcon. Sure. And I know a little bit of the history, so I'll just kind of back people up and set you up to tell your story on it. Is that so you put out an OSR primer, which I think was well received at some point.
Yeah.
And and you were in the initial. There's your primer. Yep, and I'll put a link to that as well.
My cat's on the back.
So you've been involved in the OSR scene before it was the OSR scene and Basic Fantasy, and then you discovered that you weren't kind of actually being recognized for your contributions.
It was a stupid situation, and I will admit to being vain. I will admit there was some vanity involved in it. In 2006, when I put out Basic Fantasy, when Osric first came out, we first got the word about in 2007. I believe it was 2007, maybe in late 2006, about Labyrinth Lord and Swords and Wizardry. We were it. The four of us were it. And we were all four of our games were recognized as retro clones. Everybody understood that we were cloning the old games. We were retro clones. Somewhere between there and 2015, the goalposts moved. And Wikipedia editors decided that to be a retro clone, you had to clone a specific game to some arbitrary degree of accuracy. Now, Basic Fantasy doesn't. Basic Fantasy has separated race and class. The game whose style I was mimicking and whose mechanics I was more or less following had race classes, and I never liked race classes. Never liked them back in the day, even when I was a clueless idiot running games for the very first time. I never liked them, but I didn't know any better at the time. So when I built Basic Fantasy, I didn't do that. I separated race and class. and did other things like that to build the game the way I wanted it. So I made changes. And we have Ascending AC, which was not traditional. Apparently, they decided that since I wasn't cloning a specific edition to an adequately high level of accuracy, I was no longer a retro clone. Basic Fantasy was no longer a retro clone. And that made me cross. And I actually put a poll out on Facebook and on my forum and discovered that everybody else seemed to agree with Wikipedia, which also made me cross. These are my people, and they're telling me, well, yeah, but we agree with their logic. And I'm like, okay, I don't like that. And I got cross, and I spent a month writing Iron Falcon. Iron Falcon was written in just over a month. I was trying to understand the mechanics of 1975, of what D&D was like. I can say that now. What D&D was like, and I've got a new SRD version out now, new Creative Commons version out, and I'm working on getting it into print. But I wanted to replicate that experience of what it would have been like with that first supplement in your hands. And along the way, I made contact with several people who knew about the old game, who understood things I had never been able to understand, including Simon Bull, one of the authors of Delving Deeper, which I highly recommend if you want the before 1975 experience. I think it's probably your best choice if you want to know what it was like to play that original game. But I learned several things. I learned what made that game different. I understand now why the old guys complain about thieves screwing the game up, which is, it's nice to know. I guess I should say it's nice to know what their problem with it was. I figured out I don't want to play that game. I really grasped what made it the way it was, and I understand why they like it, but I also get why I don't. It's not my game. Iron Falcon is the first version. It replicates the first version that was recognizable as that game we all played back in the day. So that was where I was going. I chose that specifically because there wasn't a retro clone of that game. Nobody had a retro clone of that game as that game was. And that's how I created Iron Falcon.
So you basically, they said, well, Basic Fantasy is not a retro clone, and you said, hold my beer.
If I drank beer, I would agree with that. Yes, I'm not a beer fan.
And I'm going to show you. So, I'll hold up Iron Falcon here, and where's the Handbook of Monsters as well.
Yep.
And so this is based upon the Little Brown books. Correct?
It is mechanically as close to those books as I could get without, number one, violating their copyright, their artistic presentation. And number two, as close as I could get, given the sketchy nature of the original information. There are things that are just not in there that you have to make up. And I've caught heck from people because I provided a basic initiative rule, which was absent in that edition. You literally weren't given directions on how to figure out initiative. Because the idea was that you came from chainmail and you were doing things chainmail way, and chainmail didn't really do initiative. So anyway, I've caught hell for that. I've caught hell for allowing player character half elves to be clerics. I ruined the game, according to one guy, because I allowed player character half elves to be clerics, where the original game only allowed non-player character half elf clerics.
Going back to the thought of community, and we are so passionate about these small little details that really do not matter in the grand scheme of the world. But don't you find it fascinating that we do love the games and talking about the mechanics and the history so much that people will fight over such minute little details?
Oh, we're absolutely out of our freaking minds. There's no question about that. We're all crazy. But it could have been soap operas. I mean, it could have been anything. People will argue about the smallest details. We could all argue about whether we like Star Wars or not. I don't want to start that one. That's like talking about alignments, which is why Basic Fantasy doesn't have them. Talking about alignments was never ever productive. So yeah. We took them out. I did keep them in Iron Falcon because they were part of the experience, but they're simpler. It's just a 3 alignment system. So.
And not to keep belaboring community, but I also can't help but go I'm over 50 now. I started with the red box, and I know for me, socializing through role-playing games is like such a key element of it, and talking about it and playing it, and as far as like when you think about your history and your friends that you played with over the years, how important is it to like your own, I guess, personal life?
Oh, I didn't really have friends in school until D&D. The first two people that I pulled in were people that I had sort of been friends with in grade school, and they didn't hate me enough not to talk to me, and it went from there. And I sucked as a game master, but they didn't know any different. And over time, I did get better because I didn't have any place else to go but up. I couldn't get any worse. So, and then they pulled in people, and I made more friends that way. And yeah, it was an important part of my life then, and it has never really not been an important part of my life. Even the periods of my life that I've had to go without games for a while, it's never ceased to inform how I approach things. I don't know. Anything else beyond that's going to get pretty personal, but
Yeah, and I guess like I just the more I'm in the hobby, the more I appreciate the fact that this is one of the few ways that older men, in particular, I guess because I'm older, I'll say it like that, can get together and talk. You know, like there's sports, there's hunting, fishing, and kind of more traditional ways. But
yeah,
I just
not a sports fan, not a hunter. So
yeah, so it's like I always kind of, and I think about your community that you built, and yeah, anyways, I just want to say I appreciate that for a lot of different reasons.
my
Myself,
in-person group consists of one player who's almost my age, the one I brought with me from high school. One player that is probably, I believe he's in his 30s now. A couple players who are in their 20s. Another player whose age I'm not certain of, and I'm not going to ask her. She'll probably see this video and then she'll tell me and she'll razz me for it, and that's fine. But I'm actually not sure how old she is. But I think she's in my age group more or less. So I've got two female players at my table right now. That hasn't always been the case, but I have an online group, and they again span a range of ages. One is older than me, and they run down to one guy who is, I think, in his late 20s or early 30s. Not exactly sure. He'll probably razz me about that because I don't actually know. But anyway, set up an online group because of COVID, and it's not going anywhere. So that's a regular. I got that tonight. I've got more players for that group right now than I can actually run, so we have to kind of switch off. But
yeah, and I wasn't saying it to make it like a men's club either, so don't take it that
no,
way.
I got what you were saying.
Yeah,
I got
yeah,
what you're saying.
yeah.
We don't make, you get to this age, it's not easy to make friends. But my wife works for a school district. She's a superintendent secretary. Every year she has to go to a conference where she gets a day's worth of training. That conference takes place, since we're in Missouri, that conference takes place in Kansas City. Has for the last, I guess, several years. Year before last, I went with her, and I had to spend a day while she was at her training killing time, and I'm not very good at that. I kill time badly, and I realized that didn't work very well for me. It's a Thursday. It's when her training is. So this last year, 2023, she said, "Why don't you see if there's any people who are basic fantasy fans in the Kansas City area who actually could take off in the middle of a day?" I said, "Do you think there's anybody who can take off in the middle of a work day?" Three people said that. We ran a game at the local game shop that was a ghost town because, of course, it was the middle of a work day, and we had a nice game. We had a good time. It was great fun. They did not succeed at the goal of the adventure, but it's a tough one. But the players, I think, all had a good time, and I'm hoping I'll see some of them again this year when we do the training again, because driving around Kansas City just gets boring after a while. So,
and then as we kind of close out, reflecting upon your contributions to the OSR and the primer, and how did you kind of see the community move after like its initial start and now where it's at, where like OSR is big, OSR is huge, and are you happy with how it's been going?
I'm pretty happy with how it's gone. I was watching one of the videos you sent me, the one from with Bryce from 10 Foot Pole.
Yeah.
I'm going to say up front, I don't agree with him on all details, but after watching that video, I did go back and I'm working on one of the adventures I had in progress. He gave me some ideas, I still don't agree with him on some of his details, but that's okay. We don't all agree. That's fine. And I also had a friend send me a link to a video from Questing Beast. I watch his videos occasionally, and this one was about OSR Kickstarters and the millions of dollars that some of them have brought in. That's astounding to me. The thought that anybody can get somebody to give them millions of dollars for an OSR game. I'm like, what the heck? I don't do Kickstarters. The only way I would ever do a Kickstarter is if I already had everything in existence before I kickstarted. I would have to actually be able to show you the finished product and say, you know, I need the money to publish this, you know, but it'd have to be finished. So that's probably never going to happen. But it just amazed me. But at the same time, I'm listening to these people, and they're talking about this, and they're all talking about this as if it was a business model. And yeah, I get a business to them, and that's fine. That's their deal. But that's not mine. Community is my deal. Sharing. I am big on sharing. I'm a big believer in sharing. I've always been, because this is about fun. This is not about making money. Making money is nice. Making money might even be fun, but this is not the kind of fun this is about. This is about getting together with your friends and having a good time. And I'll tell you, I've made this joke before, but it's true. Basic Fantasy was a scam to get people to write me adventures. I put a game out. People write adventures for it. I get to run those adventures for my players. And I do. I run the adventures that I have, that people have contributed for my players, or adventures maybe that I may have written, but other people contributed too. You look, there's a lot of contributors in some of the adventures, even the ones that I've written. Without the twisted mind of Stuart Marshall, the Osric guy, the Castle D'Angelo adventure wouldn't be half as crazy. It is a crazy adventure, but it wouldn't be half what it is without Stuart Marshall's contributions. And some of the other adventures that I've run, some of J.D. Neal's adventures, I get along great with them. JN1, the Chaotic Caves, and Morgan's Fort. You put them about 2 days travel apart, or maybe 1 day travel apart on a map. You got a good starting area for first level player characters. It's just a good combination because they all fit together so well thematically and so forth. But that's what it's always been. It's always been about community. It's always been what I've been about.
And I mean, you have, through this process though, do you have expertise on like navigating Amazon and Lulu probably better than most people that make games? Like you could almost consult as far as how to get them up there.
I don't think I know as much as you think I think, but I think I do. Whatever. but no, I've got it. I'll tell you one thing, and I'm going to call a name here. It's called Lightning Source. They're the company that does the actual print publication for Drive-Thru RPG. Those guys need to up their game. They need to wake up and start paying attention to their customers, their sellers. When I do a cover for one of these books, I can do the same exact cover for Lulu and Amazon for the front and back, and then I have to put them into their layouts to make them fit. But I can use the same exact cover layout for everything, send it to them, and they're fine with it. The covers are done in RGB color because that's what computers normally work in. Lightning Source wants all the color converted to CMYK. 3 or 4 years ago, more like 10 years ago, when I first started putting stuff on Drive-Thru RPG, I couldn't figure out how to do that. I don't have it handy, but I've got some basic fantasy rule books where the cover is distinctly yellow because I couldn't figure out how to get what they wanted because I won't buy commercial tools. Everything we use is open source. Finally figured out how to get a cover color separation done right for them. But there was a long delay because I just couldn't figure out how to do it. And I finally figured out how to do it with GIMP, which is a tool I use all the time. And it worked. This last time I did books for them, the 4th edition books, I have a website that I can upload the covers to and they'll fix it. Now here's the deal. If I can upload the cover to this website and they can fix it without any instructions from me and the end result is perfect, why does Lightning Source not just do that? Why don't they do that? The Iron Falcon 75 book has some transparent artwork in it. It's a bad idea. It was a mistake on my part. I didn't understand what kind of a mistake it was because Lulu and Amazon composite the transparent art on top of white, and that's how they make their pictures. But Lightning Source removes the alpha channel. The problem with the transparent black and white image, every pixel is black. Every pixel in the image is black, but they have different levels of transparency to allow the paper to show through. When you take the alpha, the transparency away, you get a black box. It's a little black box right here on the page. It's like, what is that? And I didn't understand that's what they were going to do. And it's like, it's not that hard. Amazon does it. Lulu's been doing it for decades. So that's my rant. That's rant for today. Lightning Source, up your game. You can do this better. It's not hard. All your competition does it better. Stop telling me it's because you're a professional print company, because you're working with people who aren't professionals. None of us putting stuff on drive-through are professionals, even the ones who are trying to make a living at it. We're not that kind of professional. Stop putting us through those hoops. Do it right, because it's not complicated for them to do it right.
Okay.
So that's my rant for the day.
Lightning Source and Drive-Through RPG.
I hope you're not being sponsored by them.
No
Okay.
sponsors. No sponsors for the channel. I'm just
right.
free. I'm just freewheeling it like everybody else here.
Right. That's the only thing that's made me mad in a long time. That makes me more irritated. That makes me more irritated than this silly book.
The copyright violation.
Yeah, the copyright violation was just a non-professional person who didn't understand the rules. Lightning Source should know this.
Yeah,
they shouldn't have to be told. Anyway, I keep showing my FallCon shirt. This is from 22. I didn't actually make it to FallCon in 22. That's a little convention in Quincy, Illinois. I said last year after I went and it was a bust. I usually fill a table twice at QuinCon, which is the regular convention in Quincy. FallCon is kind of a secondary one. Said I was never going to do it again. And then this year I got to talking with some friends and I got an idea. I'm going to try to run an event at FallCon. I've invited everybody, and that means everybody, anybody who can make it to Quincy, Illinois, and who wants to be there for 2 days for the part of the convention I'm going to be there for. I can take up to 30 players. Well, it's not all going to be at my table at one time. We're going to run 4 sessions. Going to run an adventure in 4 parts. Some of the players are going to get tapped to be game masters. I know some of them, many of them are. And the adventure segments are written in such a way that they don't give away what the next section is going to be. I mean, other than, where they're going to end up. So that whoever game masters the particular session won't really be gaining anything for their next sit, because most people are only going to GM 1 session, depending on how many I get to show up. But we're going to run around a rotation so that every person who participates gets to sit at my table once, at least once, depending on how many show up. The more of them show up, the less times they get to sit at my table. But that's the plan, is to have this 4 sessions, 2 sessions on the Friday, which would be it's Labor Day weekend this year. It's not in September like the shirt says. So it'll be August 30th and 31st, I think, for us. And then the first is I think the first is Sunday. Anyway, this Friday and the Saturday for the convention, I'm going to have 2 sessions on Friday, 2 sessions on Saturday. And everybody, we're going to have 30 pre-gens. People get to pick, their pre-gens, and then we'll shuffle the group every time. So you're not signing up for a specific table. You're signing up for the event. And then I will coordinate with people and arrange the tables, however, based on who actually shows up. And I am writing the adventure now. I mean, not now, but, I'm presently writing it. I'm really looking forward to doing this. I'm still going to have my usual appearance at QuinCon, running 2 sessions there this year. But I'm hoping I can make this FallCon thing work out. I'd love to see a bunch of these guys. I've had a person tell me that he might come from California. I've had a person tell me he might come from Florida. I've got people from Indiana talking about coming, which is not a short drive. It's astonishing to me that they would even consider it. But I actually talked about the conversation started out with, could I run my own convention? And my answer is, why would I run my own convention when I can hijack another one? They're going to run one anyway. So, so that's something I wanted to announce. That's something that we're working on. I've already talked about it on our Facebook group and on the forum, which everything happens on the forum.
Well, I will have all the links to the forum and their Facebook group and all your sites. And so
you betcha.
FallCon.
I'm sorry for pushing that long on you, but I wanted to get that part out.
No, that's good. I appreciate that. And that, once again, kind of goes to speak to how awesome of a community that you've built. So, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I think it's a really, really amazing community of people that are all passionate about the game. So Chris, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate all the contributions that you've made to gaming in general, and best of luck in the future.
Thanks for having me. Appreciated it.